everyone. Welcome to this week's Indie Artist Music Hustle with Blind Intelligence. I'm your host, Miss Ronnie, where I always seek to give you exquisite cranial repertoire. This week, before I get started with what I'm going to talk about this week, I want to tell you about this week in Arkansas. It started on September the 1st. It's the Arkansas Collaborative Podcasters Festival. It was through ARCAST, the ARCAST podcast, which is hosted by, I have to take notes, T.I. King and Karen Stewart. I actually went to several of the events this week, and I had a really good time. I went to the podcasters contest. I went to the meet and greet, and I'm actually going to be an interviewer for the main event that is happening Thursday, September the 7th at the Innovation Hub in Little Rock. Doors open at 4, I think. But if you are a podcaster or interested in podcasting, they have some free events going on this week. And Thursday is the main event. You can purchase your ticket on Eventbrite. They have regular admission and VIP. And I hope to see some of you there. With going to the contest, they had some guest speakers there and some really good guest speakers that have like a lot of accolades under their belt. And one of the things that I noticed that when speaking about podcasts is that when we think about music and podcasts, even though we have music podcasters, think about music and podcasts, we normally think about when we use the background music and different things like that. So because I like to read articles, and I remember when I was working on one of my masters that I would read a lot because I had to write papers, and my teacher would be like, you need a cite right there. You need a citation there. And I was like, well, I don't remember where I read it from. I just read it and I remember it. And she was like, well, if it's a fact, you can go find it. And so I was like, okay. So I took notes because I am so horrible with names. And that was the reason why I told a little story. According to Rolling Stone's Culture Council, musicians should use podcasts to keep listeners up to date with what they have going on. But this is something that stuck out to me from this next article that I read, and her name is Maddie Raven, and the name of her article was Why Every Artist Need a Podcast, and she made some really good points in it that I agree with. Podcasts have become a mainstream way to share your message with the world. Even though the statistics are clear, consumers want it, but the music industry just haven't caught on. And I found that very interesting because I started thinking about the possibilities that musicians could have, especially independent music artists could have with working with a podcast. So she said, why podcast? It says consumption statistics are growing daily with 80% listening time. So people are listening to podcasts, and I will have to say that I am one of those people. I remember, I know podcasts have been out for years and years, but I remember I don't want to just sit up and listen to somebody talk. And I was going into a shop one day to have a man to look at my car. And he was listening to a podcast, and I was like, oh, who you listening to? He was like, Willie D. I was like, Willie D from the Ghetto Boys? And he was like, yeah. He's like, I like listening to him. So I was like, okay. So him listening to the podcast by Willie D made me want to start listening to podcasts. And I actually started enjoying them. Because if you're consuming, I feel like consuming anything other than music on places like YouTube or, talk radio, to me, that's kind of like having a podcast anyway, except for podcasts are on demand. So she says many artists use social media like Facebook and YouTube to increase their fan base, but these platforms are oversaturated with musicians, which is right. So as a musician, and you know that you want to expand your fan base, you look at other avenues that you can reach other audiences. And one of the things, and I said that I wrote down names, but I forgot she did a whole presentation. And I would, when I get ready to edit this video, I will put her name in the description. But she said one of the main things that you have to do with podcasts is borrow audiences. And that is very true. And that's the reason why you interview different people and you move outside of your normal people that you will collaborate with. I remember I was talking to I wouldn't say a coworker or a client, but I would say a business associate about different collaborations with independent music artists. I said, it's hard for me to get some artists to understand that when you collaborate with people, you're doing a collaboration to grab their fan base and you're swapping out fan bases to gain a bigger fan base. So that should be the reason why you would collaborate on music, other than you really liking, what the other person do, because you have that freedom as an independent artist. But if every album that you release or every EP that you release has the same collaborations over and over and over again, that means that you have the same fan base because you're not growing it. And at what point do you say, hey, I have to put the business over the friendship, because we're just collaborating as friends at this point? If you're still collaborating and nobody is pulling in a bigger audience, if your views and everything are staying at the same on every platform. She says, however, podcasting is clearly engaging people across the globe, and podcast listeners being more active on social media with chances to increase social media following at the same time as the podcast. And that is true too. And not saying, and I feel like being an independent artist, that you're already starting with a fan base. Not, I think in my case, I kind of came in as, who is she? But that's okay for me. I can tell you who I am. But anyway, I think that when some artists interview, the interview could go on, and you could just learn so many new things about them. And as the interviewer, you have to break things up and decide what you're going to keep and what you're going to edit out and all of that. With a musician having their own podcast, or independent artists having their own podcast, they're able to get out all the information that they want. They can talk about so many different things, but I will get into that in just a little bit. She says there are over 700,000 active podcasts, but barely any presented by musicians. That information right there is saying, hey, that's another avenue to make money. And I'm going to get into that more than just increasing your fan base, because I feel like that is opening up new doors, new avenues. I think that when COVID happened, anything technological just came into play, just putting it under a major umbrella, and it gave way to people being able to have more streams of income. I was talking to a client when we were talking about what direction he wanted to go with doing this music with his client. And he was like, I just want to make money off of streaming. I was like, your fan base is not that big just to say that you want to make money off of streaming. I said, we really have to come up with a marketing plan and the starting point, and you have to have a realistic budget and not just hope for the best. And I have noticed that artists will say that. I had another artist to say, well, I just release it on social media and just hope it sticks somewhere. No, that's not what you do. And if you're going to keep doing that, then you're going to keep staying stuck in the same boat. She talks about how musicians benefit from podcasts. Podcasts strengthen the relationship between the consumer and the creator and allows musicians to offer more outside of music. And so I would use as an example, such as you collaborate with somebody, you're an artist, you collaborate with somebody across the globe, and you have your own podcast. And so you invite that person on to talk about it. Well, how did you feel when I first sent this? And what changes did you want to make? I mean, so you can really give the background information on the process that it took to make that project come into fruition. She said podcasts allow musicians to show their personality, build personal relationships with their fans over time, and eventually sell music and other merchandise or anything that you want, which is true. Because there's different companies that you can go through, but after you have so many downloads per week, per month, and listeners and subscribers and all those things, you can seek sponsorship opportunities where people can play ads on your podcast, where you can have them come on as a guest, and all those different things is avenues where you can link your music and you can play your own background music and make money off of your music. There's like endless possibilities to the things that you can do to a podcast being a musician, because if you're going to use your own music, then you'll never get flagged. You don't have the issues that we have trying to. People are asked if your podcast is on video, but if you have your podcast on video, you can use some music doing a podcast and get a license for it, but it doesn't transfer over to the social media channels like that, because it's like you have to add it as an after fact, and I just feel like that's a lot of work, and the podcasts are growing like that. Then social media and podcasting and licensing and all of that, y'all need to get together and stop giving people a hard time, because you would definitely get flagged on Facebook. She talked about some topics that musicians can cover. It said a musician should create a podcast with the aim to increase the audience and fan loyalty, with each episode adding value through educating, entertaining, and interviewing. So that goes back to showing that personality and giving more in-depth detail to how this was created and how you felt about it. And I kind of feel like it could kind of almost take the place of a press release. Getting listeners for a podcast is similar to getting people to listen to music, because it requires the full attention. However, unlike music marketing, podcast marketing adds more value to the target audience, so it's much easier. I don't know if it's much easier, but I feel like with having a podcast, website, doing all the other things that you should do, can increase visibility so much for an artist, and I'm very excited about it. As I said, I think that the possibilities are endless with artists doing podcasts to promote themselves. It's like it combines a lot of things together that can make it easier for you. And to start a podcast, it depends on how you want to do it, but really doesn't even cost any money if you archive your things. But it's a way to get more listeners. You can get sponsorship opportunities. I mean, it's just a whole new world. And like she said, podcasting has been around and is gaining steam, but not in the music industry. So I like to consider myself a trailblazer. And when I was talking to one of the organizers of the podcast convention, I was telling him that I feel like that Arkansas is very talented, but really not standing out for, I guess, major things. Like you might have a couple of people that play professional football, or a couple of people that made it big in blues or something like that. But when you think about Arkansas, it's like you think about Bill Clinton and Sarah Huckabee Sanders. So I think that the podcasting can open Arkansas podcasters and independent musicians up to a world a whole nother world of for an audience, because some people don't like podcasts. I was one of those people that didn't like podcasts until I decided to give it a chance because somebody was listening to somebody that I like. So I just want artists to think about starting a podcast to promote themselves, because I've read in one of those articles that you can cross post to social media for what you can. Even with my podcast, I record it here, but I also have it on video. That's a major thing. In addition to the podcast, and what I do is I have it to run live on all social media platforms simultaneously as it runs, as it airs on the podcast platforms, which is on all podcasting platforms. So there's a lot of different ways to get it out there. And then you can cut it up for shorts for YouTube. You can create reels on Facebook. You can do little shorts on TikTok. You can just do all kinds of things. I know I'm missing some things, but I'm just saying off the top of my head. And I just want artists just to think about, or even come and see me, or email me, www.blonde-intelligence.com. And don't forget to come out to the event for the Arkansas Podcasters collaboration Thursday night starting at 4 p.m. at the Innovation Hub in Little Rock. And I will see you next week. Bye.
Hey girl, let me tell you about this podcast.
Girl, everybody has a podcast these days.
But this one interviews new and interesting indie artists. It's called Indie Artist Music Hustle with Blonde Intelligence.
Girl, I'm gonna have to check her out.
Give it a check, girl.